good afternoon. Welcome to the last session of this conference. I'm Catalin and I serve as the chair for the SESMI Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Committee. This year, the committee has consisted of myself, Margrethe Brunwage, Dan Flory, Lingfei Luan, and Kata Sita. Our objective is to increase diversity, inclusion, and equity in SESMI in relation to its membership, research teams, and teaching activities. One strategy to achieve this is by expanding our dialogue with other fields that resonate with cognitive, philosophical, aesthetic, neurophysiological, and evolutionary psychological approaches in the analysis of moving image media. Last year, the conference in Gandia, we launched our first event, which focused on the question of what kinds of research would promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in the study of moving images. This year, our event focuses on the question, what are the implications of DEI in a pedagogical context when teaching the moving image? And we have invited three renowned scholars who can shed light on this question. The speakers will first give a short presentation about the research, followed by a roundtable discussion and audience Q&A. And afterwards, we'll divide the session into three breakout rooms in different rooms in the other building. And every room will have a different theme based on the speaker's presentations. And in those sessions, participants can exchange experiences, ideas, questions, or anything related to their teaching of moving image. However, first of all, I would like to offer my heartfelt thanks to our three speakers and to welcome them. And let me introduce them in the running order. So Alex Madva is Associate Professor of Philosophy and Director of the California Center for Ethics and Policy at Cal Poly Pomona. His teaching and research explore how the social sciences inform philosophy of mind, race and feminism, and ethical and political questions related to discrimination, implicit bias, and intergroup cooperation. He has co-edited 2 volumes, An Introduction to Implicit Bias, Knowledge, Justice, and the Social Mind for Routledge, and The Movements for Black Lives, Philosophical Perspectives for Oxford University Press. He has run numerous workshops and training sessions on bias, stereotype threat, and imposter syndrome for schools, courts, and wider audiences.
Great, thanks for having me, everyone. I'm really excited and grateful for the opportunity to discuss these things with you. And I've only got 7 minutes, so I'm going to get right to it. Okay. So suppose you're an impressionable student walking into your first computer science classroom, and this is the room that you walk into. Okay, so what kind of signals is this classroom sending about who belongs in this space? Well, we've got a Call of Duty poster in the background. There's a bunch of Star Trek paraphernalia. We got a bust of Spock on the table here. There's there's magazines strewn about. There's weird technology on the floor. It looks like an external hard drive. So what messages is this sending about who belongs in this space? What kind of person would be interested in these things? Not a trick question. Also not a trick question. When you imagine the prototypical person who would be interested in these things, what gender person are you imagining? Okay. Instead, you might have walked into a classroom like this, which isn't sending as strong signals about who belongs in this space, except maybe for fans of mid-century abstract expressionism. What researchers have actually found is that when students enter into these geeky sci-fi computer science classrooms, it significantly reduces women's interest and expected success in computer science, but it typically has no effect on men. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that women can't be into sci-fi as well. Some of my best friends are women who are into sci-fi, but as it turns out, it's more common to be into that stuff if you're a man than if you're not. And in fact, for men who are not into that stuff, entering into that classroom is also a turnoff for when they think about cognitive science or computer science. So researchers have found across several replications that girls and women are up to 3 times more likely to express interest in computer science if they're asked in that neutral room than if they're asked in that computer science, the geeky computer science classroom. And they've also tested this in virtual classrooms and found the same effect. So what cases like this illustrate is the extent to which our environments influence students' sense of ambient belonging or feeling of fit in an environment. So a question for all of us to ask is, what messages about who belongs are we sending in our course websites, syllabi, textbooks, and the moving images that we use in our courses? So take another example. For many years, the number one comedy on American television was The Big Bang Theory. What messages is this sending about which sorts of people are more likely to be academics, more likely to be into science and math? How good are their social skills compared to other people who are not into science and math? And part of the reason I really like this image is because I came across a bit of fan art, imagining an alternative reality. What if we swapped the genders of these characters? What if that had been the number one comedy in America? But of course, part of what's funny about this is that we're imagining an alternative world with a different number one comedy, but they've actually preserved all the racial and ethnic identities of the characters. So they're still all white and South Asian, rather than imagining a wider array of people who could occupy those roles. So many disciplines like mine, which is to say philosophy, remain deeply exclusionary and continue to be dominated by wealthy, white, cis, masculine, able-bodied Anglo-American perspectives. So one important response to that project has been to diversify syllabi. And that's a good first step, but it's nowhere near enough. So just to take some anecdotal examples, if you think about, if all you're doing is seeing a person's name on a syllabus, then if you see names like Jennifer Morton and Andrea Pitts on the syllabus, you're probably going to make certain assumptions about their social identities. In fact, Jennifer Morton moved to the United States from Peru when she was in college, and Andrea Pitts identifies as a mixed race Latinx genderqueer person. So all of that stuff gets left out if all you're seeing is a name on the syllabus. So it's really important to instead incorporate different kinds of moving images into our classrooms. So let's say, hypothetically, if you're teaching 20th century existentialism, how could you get some moving images into your class?
I would like to add someone to our group here. Professor Paul Weiss, a Sterling Professor of Philosophy at Yale. Were you able to listen to the show backstage?
I heard a good deal of it, but then I was behind the rostrum here.
Yes.
So I heard only some of it.
Did you hear anything that you disagreed with?
I disagreed with a great deal of it. And of course, there's a good deal I agree with. But I think he's overlooking one very important matter, I think. Each one of us, I think, is terribly alone. He lives his own individual life. He has all kinds of obstacles in the way of religion or color or size or shape or lack of ability. And the problem is to become a man.
But what I was discussing was not that problem, really. I was discussing the difficulties, the obstacles, the very real danger of death thrown up by the society when a black man attempts to become a man.
All this emphasis upon black man and white does emphasize something which is here, but it emphasizes it or perhaps exaggerates it, and therefore makes us put people together in groups which they ought not to be in. I have more in common with a black scholar than I have with a white man who's against scholarship. And you have more in common with a white author than you have with someone who's against all literature. So why must we always concentrate on color or religion or this? There are other ways of connecting men.
I'll tell you this. When I left this country in 1948, I left this country for one reason only, one reason. I didn't care where I went. I might have gone to Hong Kong, I might have gone to Timbuktu. I ended up in Paris, on the streets of Paris, with $40 in my pocket on the theory that nothing worse could happen to me there than had already happened to me here. You talk about making it as a writer by yourself. You have to be able then to turn off all the antenna with which you live, because once you turn your back on this society, you may die. You may die. And it's very hard to sit at a typewriter and concentrate on that if you're afraid of the world around you. The years I lived in Paris did one thing for me. They released me from that particular social terror, which was not the paranoia of my own mind, but a real social danger visible in the face of every cop, every boss, everybody. I don't know what most white people in this country feel.
Okay. That's just one kind of sample of a way in which, you've got the one person who's spouting standard kind of existentialist ideas and situating that in a different context and showing a different kind of existentialist way of thinking about things. Okay, so that's it. Thanks to everybody, to Catalin for inviting me, and to SCSMI, and hope you get in touch.
Our second speaker is Ahmet Atay, who is Professor of Global Media and Communication at the College of Wooster. His research focuses on diasporic experiences and cultural identity formations, political and social complexities of city life, such as immigrant and queer experiences, the usage of new media technologies in different settings, and the notion of home, representation of gender, sexuality, and ethnicity in media, queer and immigrant experiences in cyberspace, and critical communication pedagogies. He's the author of Globalization's Impact on Identity Formation, Queer Diasporic Males in Cyberspace.
Okay, I am coming to the, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me and for the space to talk about some of the very important issues that we are dealing in all parts of the academia. I would like to start today by saying that you're going to hear a little bit about why I'm doing the research or the teaching I am doing. So there is a reason. I would like to go back to, I think, 25 years ago. When I was a master's student, I walked into a group of, faculty, and I was trying to figure out who I would like to work with when I was very young, at the age of 21 at Ohio University. And somebody stood out in the crowd because she was very sharp and she was having a very critical perspective on the media and the moving images. So I said, Jenny Nelson, I would like to work with you. And she said, if you would like to work with me, you have to take all of these courses before you even, we can start negotiating about your master thesis. So let me tell you that grounding in the class that she was teaching, gender, race, and class in media, really shaped who I am today as a scholar, but also how I go about teaching some of these very critical issues. So from the get-go, I guess I was taking a very intersectional approach to everything I was doing. I have a training in cultural studies, post-colonial theory, feminist media and film, queer media, and the political economy of media. So all of those in so many ways are intersecting with everything I do in terms of teaching and in terms of writing about teaching some of this work. On the top of this, as I was doing my PhD, I was also exposed to intercultural communication, understanding the culture and the diversity and intersectionality from a very not a media, but also a human aspect of it through the storytelling. So all of the work that I have been doing, taking these approaches today. So what you are going to hear are very much of personal stories or the type of things I'm doing in the classroom that are shaped by these two maybe perspectives, but also historical starting points for me. I am teaching at a small liberal arts college in the middle of Ohio. Yes, they can be very progressive, but they are extremely structured in so many ways that you really need to elbow people to create something new and something that speaks about who you are. So one of the things that I didn't see myself in the curriculum in the department that I started. So I designed a mediated gender sexuality class. It was something new for the students, and they gravitated towards it because in some ways, or in so many ways, I managed to design a syllabus that they saw themselves in the class. So from that on, everything that I've done was really enabling the students to see themselves in the curriculum. And I needed to see myself in the curriculum too, as an immigrant person who was teaching these classes. So the class has taken a very intersectional perspective, looked at the historical lineage of the American media in particular, looking at the development of the film, looking at the development of television, radio, and how everything that we are speaking as the history of the media has been white and extremely male-centric and very homophobic in so many ways. So in order to educate the students, I always started to ask questions about naming the top 5 women directed that they know. They cannot even come with one. So we started to dig into the history to understand the structure that really disempowered the historically marginalized. So that became one of the maybe the early prototypes of the classes or type of classes that I was teaching at my current institution. And while I was doing that kind of teaching, I started to also start writing about some of these intersectional things. I created my own first book on diaspora, globalization, new media. I have been working on serial narratives, but it's a lot about transnational serial narratives. I edited, co-edited mediated critical communication pedagogy book where we started to look at mediation and critical pedagogy, and now we are working on the second one. And I have done limitless writing on transnational queer cinema, media, as well as the decolonizing and transnational media. So what I was writing started to be implemented in the classroom, and the type of things I was teaching in the classroom was leading me to start thinking other ways of looking at the media. So I realized that the communication studies department that I was situated, it was not, I guess, designed to do the work that I wanted to do. So I designed a new department or a new major called Global Media and Digital Studies. It was brand new for the college, and it is still very much on the critical side of the critical things. If you look at it, from the get-go, we decided to take a very transnational approach. We need to understand the media, not from the European or the UK or the US perspective, but looking at from a global perspective from the get-go. So one of the things that we started to look at, it's not only intersectionality, we needed to look at the globe, how the globe works in the media, movement of the bodies that works in the industry, looking at the products and the movements of the products. While we were also doing this, we committed that we were going to be an anti-racist, but also we needed to decolonize the syllabus. So therefore, I started mindfully, completely decolonize the syllabus. So we never start with the canon. We start with what is contemporary, what is needed, and go from there. So we needed to question, why are we studying the canon? What's the purpose of it? Obviously, we cannot ignore the canon, but we need to have a critical eye on it. And therefore, we also needed to understand the link between theory and the practice, because we didn't want the students to be only start working on the theory and forget the practical side of the things. But students who wanted to do the practice, we needed to give them all of those lenses. And two classes that I have developed in this particular major, transnational approaches to media and film and the queer cinema, is really embodying those tenets. One of the things that from the get-go, I tell my students, you're not going to be, for the most part, exposed to US version of the media theory. We are going to really decenter that. Yes, you're going to learn about it, but we are also going to start thinking about other ways of consuming media, creating media, theorizing media, writing about media, thinking about media. And we also do the same work when I do teach the queer cinema class, because it's a transnational queer cinema class. We are looking at the movement of the bodies. We are looking at the laws that govern the images, why the images are depicted certain ways, who benefit from them, and how do we in the Western societies are looking at these images, in what perspectives. And we are really questioning the idea of the power, agency, history, the colonial past, the racist and homophobic past that our collective cultures do have. So all of those are maybe in some ways to suggest that we have work to do, and intersectional perspective might not be enough, and we need to pair that with a very transnational lens to understand what is going on, not internally, but externally around us as well. So I am proposing that we need to put them side by side when we teach media or images, and look at helping the students to analyze them from those two perspectives. Thank you.
And our third speaker is Beth Johnson, who is Professor of Television and Media Studies and Head of the School of Media and Communication at the University of Leeds. She's co-author of Media Studies, Texts, Production Context, and author of Paul Abbott's. She's co-edited the volume Social Class and Television Drama in Contemporary Britain, Youth Subcultures in Fiction, Film, and Other Media, and Television, Sex, and Society. Her work also includes the co-creation and executive co-production of the short film series Industry Voices, which explores intersectional barriers to opportunity and progression in the UK screen industries.
Okay, so thank you for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to talk to you today. So following on from my fellow panel members, what I'd like to do is use the next few minutes to reflect on the value of the pedagogy of film practice in relation to diversity, equality and inclusion. And in particular, I want to pick up on how intersectionality has been a really crucial approach and tenet for research work and in research-led teaching and learning with students. While I'm primarily a theorist of film and television with specialisms in gender, social class, race and region, and I look at those things both in terms of labour and cultural industries and in terms of representation as well. One of the drivers for my work has been, I think, connected very much to and started really from my own passion for and belief in the power of screen media to create empathy and connectivity. So the power of audiovisual storytelling to make student communities, to make me feel. As a powerful medium for storytelling, I think film changes the provenance of knowledge, and it really allows for multiple histories and identities to be inscribed in the same place. So in terms of inclusivity then, film and television are, or at least can be, really powerful tools of and for change. But as research tells us, however, and I'm thinking here primarily for the moment, of UK research on the screen industries, representations of diversity, equality, inclusion, both on and off the screen, show that while representations on the screen in the UK are becoming a little more diverse and inclusive, off screen, behind the camera, essentially, inequalities in the people who make up the film and television industries are in many ways absolutely entrenched. So how then might we work with our students to support change in relation to diversity and inclusion, drawing on both critical knowledge and on practical skills? So one example that I'd like to share relates to a research-led film series that I was able to create and exec produce with the independent production company Kanda, who are based in Leeds. And the film series is called Industry Voices, and it's made up of 12 short films. 11 of those are around 4 minutes long each, and they essentially focus on professional industry, media industry, screen industry individuals at different career levels, in slightly different positions, talking about their experiences of diversity, inclusion, and indeed equality in the screen industries. And then there's a more extensive 22-minute film which layers the experiences of all those different participants together to really draw out the intersectional and structural barriers. So the film series was funded when I was the diversity and inclusion lead on a project in the UK called the Screen Industries Growth Network. And it was created across 2020 and released in early 2021 as a series. And of course, that was a very difficult time in lots of ways. So it was created directly in the months following the murder of George Floyd, and also during the pandemic lockdown in the UK and in many other international countries as well. So surfacing intersectional barriers was a key aim of the series. So as Misra, Currington and Green from 2021 argue, open quotes, intersectional research captures the multidimensionality of subjects' lived experiences, as well as how relations in power shape these experiences. So intersectionality here is a theoretical approach which explores the ways in which, as Yuval Davis has talked about, multiple axes of social power constitute particular shifting and contested social positionings, identifications, and normative values. So what I'd like to do now is show a trailer for the film series. It's about 1 minute long. And then I'll talk a little bit about how I've used these films in relation to teaching. Okay. please let me know if there's a problem with the image or the sound. Thank you so much.
Just know when you do us wrong, you might trend. That's it.
I've just had someone feed back on you and say you're very northern. What does that mean?
I was slightly in front of my colleague and he said, "Oi, Rosa, get to the back of the bus."
I don't wake up every day thinking about being working class. Do you think posh people wake up thinking every day about being posh?
I suddenly felt very aware of my race. Felt like I was walking around with a label on my head.
Being a mother and being in this industry, you could just laugh, to be honest, because it's like, what's the point?
There are glass ceilings that are piled upon glass ceilings, especially if you're not white straight male.
I'm not pretending to be somebody else anymore just to fit in.
I could draw a very straight line between having spoken up about things and then no longer having a job.
Yes, you can look fine on the outside, and yes, you can look normal, but actually behind the scenes and personally and privately and domestically, you can be struggling.
People would make fun and be nasty about, in fact, one person said my food smelled like dog food.
Just know.
Okay. So in terms of the film series, and as I say, that's a trailer for it. I want to just talk a little bit about what we wanted to do. So first of all, in creating and executing this, I really wanted to work with the industry to create a series of research-led films for the industry. It was important that there's a relationship between ourselves as institutions of teaching and learning and the creative industries that many of our students go into. I also really wanted the films to centre lived experience of industry professionals up and down the UK. And that's because I think that while there's been many promises of change over a long time and a real stagnation in terms of actual, demographic changes behind the camera, I think that stories are immensely powerful. And if we can focus on stories, not just on statistics, there is a better chance of us shifting the dial. This particular research-led film series had a focus on race, on gender, social class, disability, and region. But I also was really fixed on surfacing intersectional barriers and discrimination through the making of these films. We also, of course, wanted them to engage with national debates and groups and campaigns, things like the TV Coalition, Black Lives Matter, Raising Films, Be Inclusive. But maybe more for our purposes today, I wanted to create the films so that we've got a pedagogical tool, so that the films have a pedagogical value that we can use in the classroom, that we can draw on, that really helps to enable students to better understand the issues in the industry and to create change. In terms of how it was done, and these are questions that I talk to my students about when they're creating their own films, when they're writing about film and television. We recruited contributors and industry professionals who really wanted to and felt able to speak out. It was a particularly difficult time, and not everybody felt able to do that, absolutely understandably. So there's this notion about being careful, caring for people when you are recruiting, and not, approaching people coldly in these sorts of collaborative projects. We also worked with a production company, with Canada, who were already invested very heavily in equality, diversity and inclusion. They had experience and this really strong reputation for caring for contributors. They had amazingly high production values, and we had to have high production values so that the industry themselves would engage. And they had experience of working respectfully on difficult issues. Importantly, crucially, the films were made with a diverse team. Okay, so Sally Ogden, Harry Locke, Seema Basharan, Kudzi Chinimbri, Lydia Noakes, Anna Hall. There were 3 stages of interviews and consent that our participants, who are the heart of these films, went through. And that's because one of our aims was to do no harm. We were very aware of the risks that participants were taking in speaking up so publicly, and still, having careers in the industry, many of whom are freelance. We offered counselling as standard after the interviews to any of the contributors who wanted or needed it. and we consulted the contributors about the cuts and the edits, and we made changes where requested. And so these are all, you know, I don't just mean these in the context of these films, but they're really important issues to discuss with students in terms of their positions as essentially the future of the industry themselves. So in the classroom, and as part of, I suppose, you know, the ethos of the degrees in our School of Media and Communication, we don't just want students to simply join the screen industries and replicate the current practices, because that will lead to a continued stagnation. So via this mixture of sort of theory and practice, so and the knowledge and skills inherent in those, our aim is for students to help to reshape and change the screen industries, supporting and practicing inclusion and diversity. So the films and their production decisions, some of the things that I've just talked about, can be used as pedagogical tools. They're short films, they're very, very accessible. They're on the internet, there's no cost in relation to them. They're subtitled. So I use them particularly in employability modules with students, and also in theoretical modules about cultural industries and about inequalities. And the idea was to aid students to understand the intersectional and structural barriers that they will likely face in the industry, but also to work together to think about how things might change, to think about what the hopes are that the participants in the films express about change, but also different sort of techniques of creating change. So it was about careful consideration as well of the stories that the students wanted to tell, about the teams they're part of. And I suppose looking back at this sort of ethos of nothing about us without us is for us. So that's just one example of the way in which those research-led films were able to be really useful and continue to be in the classroom to really help students recognise, engage with, and think about how we can shape change together. Okay, so I'll finish there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentations and for sharing your insightful research with us. Are there any questions you would like to ask each other, the panel? Anything that came to mind whilst you were listening to the presentations?
Well, I guess I have one question for both Ahmet and Beth, which is really about, so both of your work sounds so amazing and so important. It also sounds like a lot of work. So I'm just kind of wondering how you kind of manage in terms of incorporating all this stuff and navigating burnout and even having the resources of time and money to make all this stuff happen.
Beth, do you want to tackle that, or should I go first?
Oh, please feel free to go first. Thank you.
Okay, that's an excellent question, and I have been thinking a lot about that. So luckily, I'm on sabbatical after teaching all of those courses in 1 year. I am hiding in England, so I'm ignoring even the US reality, what is ahead of me. But that's an excellent question. And I tell people, especially people who are doing this kind of work and have been part of the historically marginalized communities, when we turn the lights off in the classroom, these issues don't end up staying in the classroom. They come home with us and we continue living them, right? We continue to experience some of those things that we teach on campus. Unfortunately, it is exhausting. At least it has been for me, because I teach again in a very small liberal arts college that there is a high demand of teaching, high level of teaching in demand. But also because there are so few of us who are doing this work, we become a resource center for historically marginalized students who are seeking for answers or seeking alternatives to maneuver the system. I am trying to make some of the invisible labor visible to the people. So talking about the invisible labor that we carry is extremely important. But one of the things that I'm also urging people to realize, when you do the DEI work, it's exhausting. And there has to be a mechanism to release some kind of teaching or some other service expertise, service time from somewhere, so we can tackle this, the work, because this cannot be done on the top of everything else we're doing.
Beth, would you like to add something to this?
Well, I think that those points that Ahmet's made are really, really important ones. I think that there are ways in which, and I'm aware that, you know, there's also a cynicism around this, but I'm aware of ways in which, you know, we can share good practice and bad practice, and that it's really sort of important to do that. And when I say bad practice, I suppose I mean the mistakes that have been made and acknowledge those as well. But I don't think there's a sort of magic solution to this. But I think ultimately part of this is about connecting up both you know, across the industries that we work with, but also across different programs, different institutions, and really thinking about how we can share that work so that it's not being repeated, and that there's a real focus on energy toward constant progression, because these issues are never going to be done, you know, and really require constant sort of vigilance and constant care and constant movement forward. But it's absolutely natural that energies will ebb and flow, and, you know, the people involved in doing that work will, you know, at times feel really, really bolstered by that, and at times feel really exhausted. So I think we have to recognize that there's going to be waves, you know, and also, you know, part of that acknowledgement, not just in terms of the film series, but in terms of not sort of assuming and going to the same people again and again to do you know, the same work. It's about how can we build connectivity and care around this issue. And I think there's lots of people who care very much, and, you know, trying to work out a way for there to be a sharing that feels productive. But this, I certainly don't have a you know, a magic bullet. I wish we all did. I think there's lots of tiredness at the moment everywhere. But I thought that what Alex was saying as well, from a slightly different discipline perspective, was still absolutely relevant. You know, we need to think about environments as well as content, as well as reading lists, as well as, you know, legal and policy landscapes as well, and try to connect those together and understand the differences transnationally, as Ahmet was saying, you know, as well as in one place. But it does require a lot of sort of connectivity to be able to do all those things. And there is an extent to which there's times when we have to think, you know, actually we're all making small steps. How can we better connect these together across disciplines, across oceans? So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Beth. Let's open it up to the audience. Are there any questions from the audience to our speakers?
Hi, so my question, I guess, is specifically for Ahmet, since a lot of your work specifically concerns the queer community and how the curriculum can better involve the issues of the queer community. So my question was, in my own work, sort of exploring a lot of the existing queer theory and literature concerning queer studies. I've seen a lot of sort of like discourse behind just even like how we sort of like fundamentally conceptualize certain ideas on which we build further knowledge in queer studies. So my question for you is, in teaching about queer cinema and other issues related to queer studies and existing queer theory, how do you sort of navigate this discourse when teaching your students?
That's an excellent question. And everything that we do has a historical past, right? We need to acknowledge where we have been, and also our political implications as what we do in the classroom to ourselves and the students. So we need to understand what we are talking, how we are talking about, who are we talking about these issues. One of the things that I tell students when they are in these classes, this is going to be a journey. We're going to take it together. There will be different levels and layers that not everybody is going to be connecting with the material, but hopefully at the end, we come to a very large consensus of what the issues are. So when the class ends, we can go out and tackle them. I am very heavy a critique of or historically criticize queer studies in the US in particular, because it has been very white and transphobic for the really long time. So one of the things that I am purposefully is doing, teaching all of that from a very intersectional and transnational perspective. So when you do that, you give the students an experience that somebody who happen to be women and queer, their experiences are very different than a white man who have been historically writing about this or making images for us. And somebody who is living, let's say, in Ghana and has been identified as part of a queer community, their experiences are going to be radically different. But because we live in a society that we perpetuate the oppressions, even in the historically marginalized communities, we don't really acknowledge the layers of human experience. And this is also true for the queer experiences. So when I taught the transnational queer cinema class, first of all, our students are not equipped to teach non-US films. So they were impatient, they didn't connect with the materials, they didn't understand the realities, except maybe the queerness of it. But at the end of the journey, when we sat down and reflected critically about the 16 weeks, there was a tremendous transformation in terms of they have a better, I guess, maybe vocabulary and a discourse to talk about what we have been experiencing in the US can and could be very different than the rest of the world. So that's why I am taking a very transnational perspective, because our students are from global, right? They come to us into our classrooms from the rest of the world, and we need to allow them to see themselves in the curriculum in so many ways. So my mission has been to give them all the layers about race, gender, queerness, or disability, whatever that we are talking about, that we cannot only isolate and understand it in one context, one experience. Is that helping?
Okay, thank you. We have a question over there.
Hi, yeah, my question I think is specifically for Alex, but I'd like to hear from the others as well if you have thoughts. Specifically from the studies side of things, not so much production. Alex, you mentioned how diversifying the syllabus isn't enough, but we need to include different perspectives or different points of view on similar issues. And I'm wondering if in critical studies, there's room for, oh, I also wanted to say how I noticed in a lot of the classes I took, especially in graduate school, how the films we would watch would be from diverse populations. However, our readings were still primarily white and male. And I'm wondering if there's room for diversifying the syllabus, not just the films we watch or the things we read, but the disciplines we are reading from. Is there room to include not just film studies material to read, but like critical studies from gender studies or race studies that can help illuminate the messages within the moving images, or help us better understand, or help our students better understand those concepts? Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think yes, definitely. But it's you know, it's like picking up on another theme. I mean, it's work finding that stuff and not just sort of replicating the syllabi that have been handed down to us. But I also think, you know, where it's one sense in which we're in kind of a golden era is that there's just massive amounts of content constantly being produced. So it's like there's tons of like, you know, partly in my presentation, I was coming at it from the perspective of like, it's not enough even just to have them in the readings. But the good news now is that lots of these folks are being interviewed in podcasts or on YouTube. And so there's tons of opportunities to engage with their work, not simply in a written form. And I think that's really impactful for appreciating that, you know, they're not just names, but that they're living, breathing people with complex backgrounds and complex perspectives. And I think engaging with their ideas in a more audio visual format, I think is really valuable for bringing home where they're coming from, especially when we're talking about critical traditions that have lots of difficult concepts. And so if you're thinking about, undergraduate populations that are coming to these terms for the first time, seeing people use the concepts in a living, breathing conversation, I think can be really valuable.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Are there any more questions? Yeah, we have one from Johannes.
Thank you for these. I guess my questions is for Beth Johnson. I'm teaching also industry studies at the University of Copenhagen. I think one of the things that we frequently encounter with our students is that some of these issues interact with issues of labor. For instance, the expectations that people will do unpaid work on short films, even though they're part of an industry issue. And I wonder in your work, and I guess also if relevant to Ahmet and Alex, do these issues of organized labor interact with these issues of diversity at some point?
Thank you so much. I think that's a great question, and the answer is absolutely. I think particularly the cultural industries, freelance is the standard, and therefore in order to, well, I suppose firstly we know from research and from the many interviews and data sets that we have, that ultimately jobs within the cultural industries are about who you know rather than what you know. So that there's an issue of networking, but one of the ways, and while we can't necessarily stop that overnight, a lot of my sort of theoretical writing has been about how those networks work, and the fact that those networks ultimately explode the myth of sort of meritocracy. So very much sort of thinking along those lines and undertaking research. But in terms of students in the classroom, one of the things that we do is when our students have placements, so when they do sort of extended placements, we only will work with placement providers who will pay. Now, that means that that in some ways the students miss out on some opportunities, but ultimately there is a line in the sand to say, it's really important that people's time is valued. And in terms, for example, of research and grant funding that I apply for, while I'm aware of the potential risks in doing so, I always ensure that any of our industry partners that we work with are ultimately properly paid and funded. And I always cite, for example, in the UK HRC policy about the creative industries and good work, which was last updated in 2021, and make a point in the application of saying, if we want better working conditions, if we want to really increase diversity and inclusivity and equality, we have to pay people fairly for the time and the labour that they put in. But yeah, it absolutely comes up, and particularly when students have left university and they're very early on in their careers, they are under significant pressure to offer free labour. And that it's very tricky, and so one of the critical things we do in the classroom is talk about the expectations that may well happen and think about strategies for managing that. We can't stop it, but we work as closely as we can with the broadcasters, with various production companies, to sort of talk about the value. But those companies themselves are steeped in a history in which ultimately there's hugely long days, there's lots of unpaid work as an expectation. But we also teach students about a lot of the sort of organizations and charities, so things like Share My Telejob, which is an organization in the UK which is currently undertaking a massive survey about the sorts of hours worked and the free labour demanded, and we teach that in the classroom, not in a sense to say to students, oh my gosh, this is going to be terrible, but you know, students need to be able to go into the industries with their eyes open in order to be able to think about the sort of changes that they want to bring and hope. So we model that in the classroom and work as closely as we can with those sort of production companies outside of it. And where things go wrong, you know, we will essentially say, okay, we are not working with that provider again, but we make sure our students are paid, and that's been quite important. I hope that helps.
Thank you very much, Beth. One last question. We have time for one more question. Or is everyone eager to go to the breakout rooms? Yeah, let's do that. Okay, thank you very much, Beth, Alex, and Ahmet, for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So we'll now split the session into the breakout rooms based on the themes that we heard. The first session is in 10:52. And the discussion will focus on diversifying the curriculum, in particular, how different philosophical perspectives can enrich teaching of moving image or enrich teaching through moving image. And it will be moderated by Dan Flory. The second session is in 10:53, and it will focus on intersectional and transnational representations in the classroom, especially how such media examples can reduce prejudice and foster inclusion in a teaching environment. And this will be moderated by Kata Sita. And the third session is in 10:54, and it will look at DI in teaching the screen industries, touching on themes like teaching film practice and preparing students for a more inclusive and diverse workforce in the screen industries. And this will be moderated by Ling Fei Luan. So we really encourage the participants in the breakout rooms to seize an opportunity to share your knowledge, experiences, concerns, or to ask questions that may even raise very difficult issues